Okay, well, let's get started with the elements of music portion of this class. We're going to study the elements of music for a few weeks. And the reason we're going to study the elements of music is just because it's helpful to have a vocabulary of musical language to be able to just have a more informed thought process and also just discussions about music. So, when we learn a term like pitch or rhythm, or so, it's helpful to, or beat. It's helpful to have just a kind of a deeper understanding of these terms. That way, you'll be more informed about this stuff. So I want you to know these terms and use them as much as you can later on in the class. Like when we get into music in China or music in India or music in Mexico, or when we're studying Jimi Hendrix, for example. Want you to be able to use some of these terms accurately in your assignments and in your discussions and things like that. Okay, well let's get started here with the content. So we're going to start off with Chapter 1, Melody. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you're also looking at the lecture slides that correspond to this video. And the lecture slides can be found in files in Canvas. So see if you can get those out and follow along. Also, a good idea would be to have your study guide handy. And as we go through here, if you haven't done so already with the reading, start you can pause this video, start writing down definitions, start getting things organized, right? So that you'll be ready for the quiz and then the exam when that comes, okay? So, for example, we have, what's our first term here? Pitch, a perceivable musical sound. It's how high or low a note is, right? Write that down on your study guide, okay? Start studying it. So, what is a pitch? It's a perceivable musical sound. How high, right? Might be something like up here, or low a musical sound is, right? So that's what a pitch is. So remember that. A frequency. A frequency is the number of vibrations per second. A musical sound usually can be broken down scientifically to a number. For example, I know that when I play this particular pitch on a guitar, right, which we call an A, that is 400. That means that this the frequency of this string, I just happen to know, is 440 vibrations per second, right? And if you ever pluck a guitar string, you can kind of see it vibrating really quickly, right? And then different pitches vibrate at different frequencies. So this one in particular is 440, I think it's right here on piano. But this one, right, is vibrating at a different frequency, and I don't know all the numbers of every every note. It's just I know this one because usually orchestras use this particular pitch to tune when they're getting ready to play or rehearse or whatever. So that's frequency. In general, smaller objects, including instruments, tend to vibrate faster and produce higher sounding pitches, whereas larger objects tend to produce lower sounding pitches. Think of like a violin, right, versus a double bass or an upright bass. You can see the pictures here in slide number 2. Also, I have a little clip to a video of a violinist and a double bass kind of playing at the same time. You can, just kind of notice, oh, okay, the violin just produces higher pitches than the double bass does. If you ever, if you have a stringed instrument like a guitar, you can even kind of see that, some of the strings, like this one, they're just larger, they're thicker than other strings, like this one, right? And you can kind of see, these larger strings tend to produce lower sound, lower pitches, and the smaller strings tend to produce higher sounding pitches. You can also look under, if you have access to a piano, not like an electronic keyboard like this, but like an actual piano with strings and stuff under the, inside of it. You can kind of see where, on the left-hand side of the keyboard, the strings inside are much thicker than the ones on the right side, right, which correspond to the higher pitches, whereas the lower pitches have thicker strings. Okay, let's move on to slide number 3. So, what's a note, right? We hear this term all the time, like musical notes, right? But a note is really just a representational symbol of a pitch, right? That we put on this thing called a staff, right? Which, what's a staff? It's just these 5 parallel lines that go horizontal. And so we place these things called notes, right? We can see here on slide number 3, I have a little musical example. And there are a bunch of notes kind of variously placed on different lines and spaces on the staff. For this class, we're not gonna get into what these specific notes are. Like I know, because I read music and I play music, that the very first note is a G, right? And it corresponds to this particular pitch, right, on the guitar. It's also here on the piano. So a note, just remember, it's just a note isn't the actual pitch. It's just a representational symbol on a piece of paper or on in a digital format like it is for this class. And a note represents 2 different pieces of information. It tells you what the pitch is, right? How high or low the note is. And it tells you about the rhythm. It tells you in the rhythm, in other words, is the duration. It's just how the length of time of a pitch, or it could be a silence, a rest. Okay, so let's sticking with this a little bit here. So these notes, these representational symbols, right? I see the first one is this, since I read music, I can see the next one is a D, which would be played here, and then back to G, and then to a D, and then I see we go back to G, and then down to D again, and then back to G, and then up to B, and then up to D, right? And then C, A, C. So I can, right, if I know what these are, then I can play these pitches because I've studied it. So I'm getting the pitch, but I'm also getting the rhythm. You can kind of see these notes. Some of them have little dots next to them, and that tells me, okay, that's 1.5 beats. Some of them have little like flags on them, and that tells me, okay, that's a half a beat. Some of them are filled in, and some of them are not filled in. Some of them have little beams above them. So you don't have to know all that stuff. But, so when I look at it, I can tell it's supposed to go. Let's move on to our next slide, number 4, and let's look at volume, right? That's just the loudness or the softness of a pitch. Musicians sometimes will play louder. Or sometimes we'll play quieter. And we'll get more into dynamics, which is kind of the study of loudness or quietness or softness of pitch in another chapter. Timbre and tone color. What are we talking about here? So a timbre is a distinct quality of sound, right? That may not make sense yet, but if we think about it, if we think about what distinguishes, for example, a voice, right? Someone who sings from an instrument, right? Or different instruments, right? Like I played this little example earlier. Right? But I mean, I could play the same thing on a keyboard and I get a different timbre, right? Or was it? Right? So you have guitar timbre or tone color versus piano timbre or tone color. Now, if I could, if I played trumpet or something, I could play it on trumpet, and then that would be, I'd be playing the same pitches and rhythms, but it would just have a different tone color because the instruments are made out of different materials, right? This is wood, and I got nylon strings, and this is an electronic instrument and programmed to sound like a keyboard, and then there's a trumpet made out of brass, so that gives you a different kind of sound. So that's what timbre is. Okay, moving on. Talk a little bit about melody, right? So a melody is just a succession of single pitches that we hear as a recognizable whole. So melodies can go three ways, right? They might go up, right? They could go, well, that way it goes down first, but then it goes back up, then it goes down, then it goes back up, then it goes up, then it goes up again. So they may go up, they may go down, or they may stay the same. So there's just three ways they can go there. And remember, when I played this, right? That's when we're looking at the music from back on slide number 3, right? I see a note, but I'm playing a pitch, and when I play this succession of pitches or notes, that's a melody, okay? So the individual, right, that's a note, there's a note or a pitch. In this case, it's both if I'm reading the music. These are all just individual pitches, right? But when I play them as a recognizable whole, right, then it becomes a melody. Okay, range. So the range is just a range of a melody is just the distance between the lowest note and the highest note in a given piece of music. And the range might be narrow, or it might be wide, or it might be anywhere in between. We'll look at a couple of examples here on this slide and the next slide to maybe further clarify that. So we'll get back to the range momentarily. Let's talk about the contour first. So the contour just describes the overall shape of a melody, right? As maybe it goes upward or it goes downward, like I was just playing on there on the keyboard, you can kind of see, or if the melody stays the same. If I look at this little example here on slide number 5, a familiar tune here. Right, the contour what would you say, like if you were to draw a line that sort of illustrates the contour of this melody, how would it go? Probably it would sort of start, somewhere, but then it would go down, and then it would go down again, because my first three notes, I've got from here down, and then down again, and then back up, and then up again. And then we're going to have kind of a leap up, because I'm going to go from here to here. Then I'm going to go up again. Then I'm going to kind of, the contour it'll go down, but not as steep. And then it'll go down again, but then it'll jump down, because there's kind of a leap there. And then it'll go up, and then it'll go up again. And then okay, so that's kind of that's contour, right? You just can imagine it as a line. And if you're following how a melody goes. An interval. So an interval is just the distance between two pitches. Certain types of music that we study use certain types of intervals. And we're not really going to get into too much music theory about it. Musicians have certain names for intervals, right? Like we would call this a second, right? We call this a third, call this a fourth interval, a fifth, right? Because it has 5 notes in between. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if I just play the lowest and the highest, right, that would be a fifth. You don't have to know all these specific names of intervals for this class. That's more for like a music theory class. But it is helpful to know just what an interval is, right? And this term is going to come up several times throughout this class when we study other musics. So be familiar with that. Let's move on to the next slide here. Let's talk a little bit about conjunct melodies versus disjunct melodies. So a conjunct melody is a kind of melody that moves principally by small intervals, right? In a joined, connected manner. Kind of like this Ode to Joy melody here. I've got first 2 notes. So I don't move around too much, right? I mean, I could even play it here. So the first whole part there, I barely go anywhere, right? The first 2 notes are the same, and then I go up 1, I go up, and then it's the same again. So this is kind of a conjunct, right? I don't move very much, right? The intervals between each note are very small. Now, on the other hand, we have disjunct melodies, like the Star Spangled Banner, for example. Which we heard on the last slide. So a disjunct melody, we have a melody that kind of moves in larger disconnected intervals. Like right off the bat, we've got G, right? We have little leaps already. And then here, we go from here up to here, right? Then we go up here. Then we go back down, and then all the way back down, and then up 1. So all this... This is a really disjunct melody because it's kind of leaping around all over the place. Okay, and then just to kind of wrap up range from the last slide. If we look at this Star Spangled Banner melody here, we can see that which one looks like it's the lowest note, right? And by the way, the lowest note is going to be the one that actually looks the lowest on the staff. So I can see, it's not the first note and it's not the second note, but it looks like it's the third note that we see, right? That one's the lowest. And then which one is the highest? It's not this one. I think it's actually this one, right? So we could say that our range is from here to here, right? So our lowest note to our highest note. Right? Or our lowest pitch to our highest pitch. So that's our range. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so phrases. Now, what's a phrase? I'm just going to give you a kind of formal definition first, and it might not make sense at first, but I think given I'll give you some examples, some musical context, and hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer for you. So a phrase we could define as a unit of meaning within the larger musical structure. Okay, that seems kind of abstract. Like, what does that even mean? Perhaps thinking about it like this might make more sense. So a phrase, a musical phrase, it's really similar to a sentence, right, that you'd read, like in a book, or that you write, that has periods and commas and things like that. So a musical phrase, though, instead of being composed of words, it's composed of a melody, right? Individual notes are kind of like the words, and the recognizable whole of that series of notes is kind of like the sentence, right? So we could think of a phrase as kind of like a musical sentence. It's made out of notes and pitches and rhythms, right? Rather than words. Let's move on to the next slide. So here we have Amazing Grace to kind of illustrate what phrases are. On the right-hand side, we can see we have something that says phrase 1, phrase 2, phrase 3, phrase 4. And then there's some other things that say incomplete, but we'll talk about that in a moment here. But let's just look at phrase 1, right? So phrase 1, we hear sounds like, right? That's phrase 1. It's kind of like a musical sentence. And then phrase 2, we have, it starts, okay? And then we have phrase 3. This one's a little bit different, but all right. Okay, so and then phrase 4 goes, okay, so now this whole little melody that I just played from beginning to end, it's kind of like a little musical paragraph, right? And each one of the phrases is like a little sentence in the paragraph. I guess there'd be like 4 sentences in this paragraph, right? Each phrase kind of has an ending, but doesn't really completely end until the end of phrase 4. Sometimes it's helpful to understand what cadences are to further understand phrases. So let's move on to slide number 9 and talk about what's a cadence in music. So a cadence is really just a resting place where a phrase ends, right? And the cadence is kind of like punctuation, right? It's kind of like a period or a comma in a sentence with words. So phrases in music, and also like in writing or literature or reading or whatever, they might be conclusive, right? Or they might be it's like there's the end of the book, or there's the end of a paragraph at least. Or they might be inconclusive, right? They might sound like there's more to come, right? One way you can kind of notice phrases often is if you're watching a singer, right? A vocalist. And that singer goes and draws a breath, right? Because that's going to be the beginning of a new phrase, right? You can also see it if you ever watch like a woodwind player, like a flute player or a clarinet, or if you watch like a brass player where they actually need to like blow air into the instruments, where they have to actually like use their lungs to to play, wherever they are drawing a breath is where a new phrase usually starts. As a guitarist or a pianist, I can kind of get away with, I don't necessarily need air to produce my instrument's sound. Although I typically do kind of breathe with my music, just because it does help with the phrasing. So if we kind of look at this, again, as far as these cadences, right? Some are incomplete and they're labeled incomplete, and some are complete. Actually, only the last one is the complete one. So for example, if we listen again, right? So there's the end of phrase 1. Doesn't really sound ended on that note. So we're going to do phrase 2 now. Still doesn't really sound ended, right? It sounds like there's more to come, right? On that note. So let's start phrase 3. Still not really ended, right? But it is kind of a resting place. So then phrase 4, if I play that, now for some reason it does sound it sounds complete, it sounds ended, right? It depends on what note I have my phrase on. So you can kind of start listening for phrases and cadences in the music that you listen to, or if you're ever out watching a live music performance, kind of like check out the musicians and see if they're vocalists, where are they breathing, right? Or if they're a woodwind or a brass player, where are they breathing? You can also usually see it kind of in the body language of if it's like a guitarist or maybe a violinist or a piano player, someone who doesn't even need necessarily to use their breathing to produce the sound, but you can still kind of see the phrasing in the way just that they're moving, right? So start looking for that. Okay, moving on here to slide number 10. Okay, what's a rhyme scheme? So a rhyme scheme just refers to the manner in which words rhyme within the musical structure. So if we look at Amazing Grace again here, you can just look at the words. Well, I'll tell you right off the bat, the rhyme scheme is A-B-A-B, right? But why is it A-B-A-B? Well, it just depends on how the words at the cadences are rhyming. So if we look at, what do we have? At the end of phrase 1, we have the word sound, right? But at the end of phrase 2, we have me, right? So sound doesn't rhyme with me, right? But at the end of phrase 3, we have found, right? So sound does rhyme with found, right? So there's where we get that A. So anything that ends with ound is A, right? And then anything that ends with E is the B part of the rhyme scheme. So say that one more time. Anything that ends with ound, as in sound or found, is going to be the A part of the rhyme scheme. And then anything that ends with E, like the beginning of phrase 2, the end of phrase 2 with me, and the end of phrase 4 is C, right? That's going to be the B part of the rhyme scheme. Now, you can do this with other songs, right? Like if the first phrase of a song ends with the word bike, for example, right? Then now the part of the rhyme scheme, the A part of the rhyme scheme ends with Ike, right? Now you might need another end of another phrase Like you got to find something that rhymes with bike, right? So what's that going to be? You could say Ike, right? My friend Ike. Or, and then the B part might be kite, right? And you have to find something like that rhymes with kite, like light or night or whatever. That's how rhyme scheme works. So start start thinking about that in the songs that you listen to. Okay, moving on here to slide number 12. Let's talk a little bit about what's a climax in music. Well, it's just the highest point of a melodic line, right? Of a melody. Sometimes in music we say a melodic line or melody. It's the same thing. So the climax represents a peak in intensity and range, right? Remember, range is like the distance between the lowest and the highest note or pitch, right? So that's what range. I mean, that's part of what a climax in music is. If you listen to the Star Spangled Banner, I have a link here to it. You can kind of check it out. Whitney Houston at the Super Bowl, I forgot, like in the 90s. And you can hear the climax at about 2 minutes and 55 seconds, right? It's this peak of highest intensity and range, right? It's the highest point of the melodic line. So check out that video when you get a chance. And check out especially, pay attention to the part at 2 minutes 55 seconds, because that's the climax. Okay, lastly here, we'll wrap this chapter up. Talk about something called a counter melody, right? This idea is going to come up a number of times in this class. We will hear about counter melodies in many other types of music that we study in this class. So a counter melody just literally means against a melody. And maybe less abstractly here, it's maybe easier to think about it as two or more different melodies occurring simultaneously, right? Occurring at the same time. So I have a little YouTube clip here for you. And if you notice, we're going to hear a melody that sounds like this. The melody starts at about 44 seconds. So if you wanted to skip up to that, it's a good idea. But we're going to see and hear a violinist play, here we have. So I'm not going to play the whole thing here, but you're going to hear that. But then at about the 57-second mark, you're going to hear another player come in. I think it's another violinist. And they are going to play a different melody. But while that first violinist keeps on playing, right? So you're going to hear at a certain point, about 57 seconds, that second violinist So we're going to hear something like that from the second violinist. But the first violinist is they're going to keep playing their melody. So anyway, and even if that didn't totally make sense, you can just see visually. You'll see, oh, okay, here's where the second violinist starts while the first one keeps playing. Then you're hearing two melodies at the same time. Then, if you keep watching and listening, you'll see then another player comes in. I think it's a cello player. It might be a violist, actually. One or the other, but anyway, you'll hear three melodies at the same time. Then you're going to hear another player come in, and there's going to be four melodies at the same time. So these are just counter melodies.